Welcome to this episode of Flourishing Leadership. I'm your host, Guy Rogers, and our mission here is to help you unleash the full potential of your leadership calling. My guest today is Mike Huckabee, a proven leader in the church, political, and media worlds, often also referred to as mountains of culture. Mike served for 11 years as a highly successful governor of Arkansas and later campaigned for the Republican nomination for president. He has been the host of his own show on Fox News, hosts a show on the Trinity Broadcast Network, and is a Fox News contributor. A leader I greatly respect. It's also my privilege to call Mike a friend, going back to when we first met in 1992. Mike, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Flourishing Leadership.
Well, it's a pleasure, Guy. You know, you kind of make me feel old when you remind me that we first became friends and worked together on some projects 31 years ago. So that kind of dates us. But, you know, we're still hanging in there. So that says a lot about the tenacity of our convictions.
Yeah, I did think about that when I was preparing the introduction and realized it was 3 decades.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of water under the bridge.
A lot of water under the bridge.
I have floated under that bridge many a time. My still lifeless body brought back to life by God's grace. So pleasure to be with you.
Amen to that. So, Mike, in my introductory podcast episode, I talked about what constitutes flourishing leadership and so much of what attempts to pass for leadership today. For instance, leadership by example, contrasted with the do as I say, not as I do, so-called leadership, is so prevalent today. From your vantage point, what do you see as the greatest leadership need today in our culture?
What you just said is very powerful. And another way I would say it, and often do in talking to people on leadership, is this: real leaders never ask others to do what they're unwilling to do. I just feel like that's a fundamental of good leadership. You never ask others to do something that you're not willing to do, because that's not leadership. I go to Israel a lot. In fact, I'll be there starting again next week. I've been there probably over 100 times since 1973. This marks the 50th anniversary of my traveling to Israel. One of the things that I have admired is the Israeli military model. Their generals, their commanders, they never send their troops into battle. They lead their troops into battle.
Wow.
They're the first ones on the battlefield. They're the last ones off. And that's how they lead. They never say, go do this. What they say is, follow me. And I've learned a lot that is true leadership, is that you don't tell people where they need to go. You go before them and ask them to join you. And it gives people a great sense of confidence that they're not being used and they're not mere pawns in someone else's games, whether it's a game of war or a game of politics. But it's as simple principle as I can come up with. Just don't ask others to do what you're unwilling to do. And that means if you're doing an event, you say to people, hey, we need to set up chairs. Don't think that you're too good to set up chairs. Now, it could be that your time can be better spent. And maybe someone else will say, hey, don't bother doing the chairs. Let us do that. You go get ready to make your speech. But everyone in the organization needs to know that you are as comfortable setting up chairs as you are standing at the podium. And that there's nothing that you would ever ask them to do, that you do it and you ask them because you think you're too good to do it. I just think that's so fundamental. Yeah. And it gives people an esprit de corps within an organization that cannot be equaled by ordering people about it. And another way I would put it is this: good leaders don't get behind people and kick them in the rear and tell them what to do. They get in front of people, model the behavior, and say, come follow me.
You know, you use the phrase esprit de corps. That, in a way, describes what I mean by flourishing leadership, that it creates a climate in the organization, in whatever it is, the military, that people feel a sense of safety, security. They do feel a sense of oneness with the leader. That's when the best comes out of people, when leaders lead like that.
Well, there's no doubt about it. And it gives people a sense of purpose. They feel secure. They don't feel like they're going to be abandoned in the midst of a project that they've been assigned to, because they're not abandoned. You're there with them. When I was governor, one of the things I try to instill in every staff member, and I'm talking about from the person who answered the phone all the way to the deputy chief and the chief of staff, I always told them, look, we're all going to make mistakes. Mine will be bigger than yours. Mine will always be on the front page of the paper.
Right.
If you make one, it'll be on page 8F. back in the back, and very few people will even know that you made it. So don't worry that you make them. Just always make sure that I don't read about your mistake in the paper. Bring it to me before it becomes public. We'll deal with it. And the other thing I would tell them is this: if you come to me and you feel horrible about what you did, whatever it was, then I don't need to yell and scream at you because you already feel bad.
Right.
There's no point in me wasting my energy feeling bad too, because you feel bad enough. You won't make that mistake again. The only time I would ever get upset with, I would say this, the only time I'll ever get upset with you is if you make a terrible mistake and you think it's funny, or you don't care, or you act like it just didn't matter. I said, then I'll realize that you are not taking your assignment seriously. That's when I might have to, and I wouldn't be hateful, mean, or yell and scream at, that was never my leadership style. But I said, at that point, I might have more comments to say. Somebody needs to be upset about what happened. If you're the one willing to be upset about it, no need for me to do it. If you're not willing to be upset, then maybe I'll have to take that role. So you get to decide who's going to be upset and how upset we're going to be. To me, that was common sense. I govern that way, not just externally, but I felt like that one of my most important jobs was not just to lead in terms of the external leadership, but to lead internally with my team, with my staff, with those who either I had chosen or had desired to work with me on that team.
Before I go to the next question, you talked about the leader leading before. I'm reminded of that film, We Were Soldiers, Mel Gibson.
Yes.
What an amazing film of leadership. And that picture of him stepping off the helicopter, first boot on the ground, last boot off the ground. It's a perfect metaphor. If you're listening, you haven't seen that film, We Were Soldiers, it's powerful. It's powerful.
Even you're talking about it causes me to choke up. I see that scene in my head and I'm thinking, I can't watch it without tearing up because it's just such a beautiful reminder of what servant leadership is, which I believe is the right model. I believe it's the Jesus model. And it's that we understand that if we have to tell people we're in charge, the one thing we can be convinced of, we're not in charge.
We're not.
Anybody who comes into the room and tells everybody, I just want y'all to know I'm in charge here. Well, mark it down. I don't know who's in charge, but it isn't that guy. He's not the one who's in charge. Real leaders don't have to announce it, don't have to go around reminding people.
Right.
It'll be pretty obvious to everybody in the room.
And those soldiers, they loved him.
Yes.
They loved him. They respected him. They'd follow him wherever.
Yes.
Because of that example.
Absolutely.
So, okay. So what I'd like to do now is turn to the three mountains of culture I talked about, where you have been really a transformative leader: the religion world, the church, the political world, and the media world. So in each of these, I'd like you to think what you would say to these leaders and how they could lead better today. So I want you to picture you in front of a group of 5,000 pastors. Okay. In today's culture, okay, what would be your exhortation to them to lead differently or lead better?
First, I would say to them, you are a proclaimer of the book. You're not an editor. Keep it simple. Keep it biblical. The biblical text will often be in direct contrast with culture. It will clash with popular opinion. Your job is not to help people to be comfortable in their sin. It's to confront them in a loving way, but it is also to lead them to the place where Scripture teaches, which are absolutely, unflappably correct. And it may not seem correct to 99% of the people who listen to you because they're overwhelmed with cultural messages that tell them that what they feel is what's important,
right.
What they think matters, and what they believe, that's what's important. But it is not what I feel. It's not what I think. It's not what I believe. It's what God says. And I know that sounds simplistic, but that's the first thing I would say to those pastors. And the second would be this: if you have a congregation, be their servant, not their celebrity. They don't need a celebrity. Don't be so removed from the people that you walk in surrounded by a security detail like you're the president of the United States, and you marshal up to the pulpit and you proclaim a very carefully crafted sermon timed perfectly for television. And then you walk away with not a single handshake of anybody that wasn't able to somehow get through your security detail. I find that so off-putting in the church world today. Be that guy that's approachable, share your life. Don't be bigger than life, be life. Don't tell everybody or give the impression that you just don't have any problems. You're so big, you're so close to God that everything's coming up roses, because that's not true. And everybody deep down knows it's not true. When you present it that way, you're not only lying to them, you're lying to yourself. So I would say to them, be transparent about your own struggles. Make the application of the gospel real for you and as well as for them. And quit worrying about, are you going to be a big deal? Because if you're not, when we get to heaven, I have a feeling that some of the people that I won't be able to get even close to, because they'll be so much closer to the throne than me, are country pastors, bivocational, who week after week, after a hard week of work and a secular job, went and ministered to small congregations for no pay or little pay, but loved those people with their whole heart. That is a big deal to me. And I feel like that we have created this culture in the church where we almost equate very secular standards of success for what passes for spiritual success.
You said something there that caught my attention when you talked about pastors that they I don't make mistakes, I'm bigger than life type of thing. And I'm reminded of what I experienced when I was at Pinnacle Forum, and also what I've experienced as a professional leadership coach. And that is that there is one vocation that is the least likely to seek out, being in a forum, a support group, get discipleship, mentorship, and guess which one that is, Mike?
Pastoring.
Pastors. I saw it in Pinnacle Forum. I see it now. And yet, when I talk to a few pastors about this, they will say, we're lonely here.
Yeah.
Well, then you need to do something about it. You don't need to be lonely. Go outside your church to be in a support group or get discipleship. If you're concerned about gossip in your church, which is a legitimate concern, obviously.
Absolutely.
But don't neglect it completely, because how do you grow as a pastor in your servant leadership role if you aren't, moving forward in your own life? I'm reminded of something George Barna said to me 3 years ago. I called him up and told him I was going to start this leadership coaching gig. And he said, Guy, you may remember my book, I think it was Maximum Faith. He said, I discovered my research. Yes, we need corporate worship. Yes, we need small groups. But if you really want to go on and walk with Christ, you need someone who's walked the path before you, a discipler, a mentor, someone. I had a man like that. I call him my spiritual father. And yet pastors often lack that, and they need it.
Yeah. Well, we all do. During my pastor years, it was hard to find people within the church you pastored that you could really open up to, because you felt vulnerable. And it wasn't that you didn't want to, but you didn't want them to feel that somehow you weren't capable of leading.
Right.
But one of the things I found was fellowship with pastors from churches, and I wasn't threatened at all. Some of them were Methodist, Presbyterian, Assembly of God. It built my own faith, and it, I guess, energized it in so many ways to have this wonderful spiritual relationship with and accountability to a group of other pastors from various walks of denominational faith. But we could be honest with each other.
Right.
And share our hurts and our doubts. Yes, doubts. There are certain things I was always confident of, the scripture and its veracity. But there were a lot of things that I had deep doubts about, still do. My own veracity, whether I'm going to be faithful to the task. But I just think that's true. You don't have to be a pastor to need that. But I think you make a great point. Pastors need it as well.
Right, right. So if you're a pastor listening to this, that's our exhortation to you for your own benefit, for your walk in your leadership role. So I want to turn now to the second mountain of culture. This is the one you were in before you were now, and that's that tumultuous world you and I both know very well. I worked in campaigns, as you know, for years, and that rough and tumble world that's gotten even more rough and tumble, and that's that world we call politics. So if you were speaking to Christians today about that mountain of culture, what would you say to them? What would be your exhortation in terms of the leadership that is needed there?
Well, the first thing I'd remind them is that they're not exempt from getting involved in the culture of their world. And I think a lot of Christians use an excuse of saying, politics is dirty. I want no part of it. I don't want to get involved. That's something I only care about the gospel. And that attitude is why we are so secularized today, and why this nation, founded on Judeo-Christian principles, has become a nation that is a skeleton of its spiritual self of decades ago, because Christians have simply failed to show up. So I would remind them, they're salt, they're light. And if they're not going to be the salt, then the meat spoils. Mm-hmm. If they're not going to be the light, then the darkness overwhelms. So if you hate the darkness and you hate the putrefaction of our culture, the spoiling, the rotting of it, well, you're responsible. It's not the secular people that are responsible for that. Jesus never said to them, you're the salt, you're the light. He said it to those of us who are his followers, his believers. Next thing I would say to them is this: if you can't stand the sight of your own blood, don't get too engaged in this process. It's brutal. And I'd say to people all the time, because I'll have folks come up and say, I'm thinking about running for office. It may be city council, it may be school board, whatever it may be. And they'll say, what do you think? I ask them two questions. First one is, what does your spouse say about this? And if they say, well, my husband or my wife is not really keen on it, but they'll come around, I'll say, well, until they do, walk away from it. Forget it. Because it's hard enough, and I mean this, it is hard enough to keep your life and your marriage together when both of you believed you were supposed to do it. If one of the two of you don't believe you should do it, it simply will be an absolute disaster.
Right.
So that's the first question. The second one is this: are you willing to lose, get back up, and keep going? Because if you see this as a one-off, I'm going to run and, I know I'm going to win. And I always say, of course you are. We all say that. I said it in every race I ever started out in. Nobody runs to lose, you run to win. But if, God forbid, but if you don't win, are you willing to learn from what you experienced and get back up? May not be the same office, but are you willing to continue to be engaged and to keep at this process? And if they say, oh, no, this is it, I'll either do it or don't, then I'll tell them, then don't. Because you can't afford to put this much pressure on yourself, suffer as many wounds as you're going to experience, and not learn from it to the point that you're a better candidate the second time you run. So those are some pieces of advice that I give from 32 years of swimming in this water.
So what I hear you saying is there are multiple levels of engagement here.
Yes.
There's the Christian who they don't feel called to run for office. They're not ready to jump into that war ring, so to speak.
Yeah.
But that doesn't exempt them from engaging and being that salt and light.
100%. It may be that you are blessed with financial resources, so you help finance a candidate. Maybe you're a person of great capacity to express yourself. You write letters to the editor. You help write speeches for candidates. It may be that you don't do anything but go and hammer signs in the ground, but engage, be involved, pick candidates. By the way, know that the candidates you pick are going to be flawed. None of them will be Jesus. Jesus isn't on the ballot. Quit thinking he's going to be. And the guy that you like and you think is just the greatest in the world, he's not as great as you think he is, but he's not as bad as his opponents think he is. But help him, and take strong stands on issues that are biblical in nature. Let me be clear about what that means. Sometimes Christians will get in a fight with another Christian over marginal tax rates.
Right.
Those are important, but there's nothing in the scripture that says that a 35% tax is somehow evil, but a 20% tax would be godly. I think they're both evil, personally. My point is, there's really not a biblical mandate on the government levying a particular levy or a rate of tax. I think there is a biblical mandate when it comes to loving those who are the most vulnerable. So when it comes to the issue of life, I'm not pro-life because there's political implications. I tell people I didn't become pro-life because I was in politics. I got into politics because I was pro-life.
Right.
And I'm pro-life because I believe that at the moment of conception, God has created a unique human life for which he has purpose. And if I believe that that life matters to God, it needs to matter to me. I think it's barbarian for us to think that we can just take the lives of innocent children in the womb because they represent inconvenience. So for me, that's a biblical issue. That's not a political issue at all. And if one party decides to embrace abortion and another doesn't, I'll lean the way of the one that doesn't embrace abortion. If those roles change, I'll abandon the party that doesn't stand for life. I'll become an independent if necessary, because I think the issue is that important. And there are a few things like that that I see as biblical issues that transcend my party, my politics,
right.
Whatever office I hold.
Mm-hmm. Yep. There's so much more we could talk about, obviously, in this area, but I want to move to the other two. The next one is the media mountain. Oh, my goodness. And we all look at the media and we tear our hair out because of the stuff we see, and it's become more hyper-partisan, and there's no pretense left of objectivity by what we call the establishment media. So speaking to Christians now about leadership in this media mountain, what would you say to them?
Never trust what you read, hear, or watch, because chances are in this environment, all of it is agenda driven. There is no journalism. Journalism is a dead, lost art. I'm not sure exactly when it died. There may be a few people who attempt to actually practice it, but for the most part, everybody is a commentator. Social media has destroyed any semblance of objectivity. Media people that once would have been credible news people now can't help themselves. They want everyone to know their opinion, so they tweet or they post or they Instagram about it. And the net result is, I guess the good news, they have exposed themselves for the advocates for a position that we all deep down thought they were. But the bad news is we can't trust them anymore to deliver something to us that hasn't been carefully cooked in their own kitchen, seasoned with the spices of their own particular liking. That's what's dangerous. And I always say, especially if I'm speaking to students, I tell them that I grew up in an era where if there was a news story in the morning paper, a reporter had gone and gathered that story, but before it hit my doorstep, there had been a copy editor, an editorial editor to look at grammar, syntax, and clean up the spelling. And there had been depending on was it a state story, a city story, city editor, state editor, and a managing editor. There would have been 3 or 4 people who would have looked at that story and have raised questions about its validity, its veracity, and the sources and how reliable they were and how many sources backed it up. And if you didn't meet those criteria, that story did not run in the next morning paper. If I read it, I had a pretty good confidence that that story had been picked apart by several people who didn't care what it said. They wanted to make sure that the manner in which it was said was honest and truthful.
It had been vetted.
Yeah. Today, a reporter goes to the scene and instantly blogs or puts it online within seconds of what he wrote. And that he or she who wrote the story injects an extraordinary amount of personal opinion and viewpoint that is absolutely the antithesis of professional journalism.
So what I hear you saying is that leadership for the Christian in this environment begins with discernment and judgment.
Without a doubt. And I would say be a cynic and be a skeptic. The two great marks of a good journalist is that they're cynical and they're skeptical. They're cynical in that they don't believe something just because it sure sounds good. They're cynical and they say, yeah, sure, prove it to me. And they're skeptical in that if somebody tells them that it's raining and they come in all drenched, they don't believe it until they walk outside and personally see that it's really raining. Today, journalists don't have a curiosity. What happened to that? A good journalist is very curious and is always asking another question and then one more after that and one more after that. But they're not stupid questions. I see journalists today, and I dealt with them in the office when I was governor. They ask stupid questions, questions that didn't have a thing to do with what they were supposed to be covering. And we need people who have a curiosity and a level of cynicism and skepticism that you just don't see enough of.
And what about the Christian who really feels a call to go into the media world? Anything in particular you'd say to that person?
I would say do it, but plan on being a very lonely person, because you're going to be surrounded by people who have an incredibly, virulent secular point of view of life. And you're not going to be invited to sit at the cool table in the break room. So if you think that you're going in it because, boy, they'll love me down there at the paper or the newsroom, they won't. They'll hate your guts. And I hate to be that blunt about it, but they will. Mm-hmm. So if you can't stand that kind of pressure and you want to be beloved, you're probably going into the wrong business. Because if you're a Christian believer and there's certain things you hold, and it's not your viewpoints, it's the integrity that you take to the job. If you honestly would go and you would report a story that was very unflattering about a pastor, a religious leader, but you knew you had to do it because as a Christian reporter, you had to tell the truth. And the truth was, this guy's a bum. Yeah. You have to be able to do that as much as you're able to try to present the story of right to life with balance and fairness. And so what I would say to people is, don't be so critical of people who take their agenda to work and then show up with your own. Be an honest reporter. And Guy, I want to tell you how I like to describe a good reporter. If I read a story about me and I can't detect whether the reporter writing that story likes me or not, that's a good story. There was one particular reporter that covered me most of my governorship. He wrote thousands of inches about me. To this day, I could not tell you whether he liked me or not. I have no idea, did he vote for me or not? Now, there were lots of other reporters at his paper. I knew exactly what they thought of me. They hated me. I knew how they felt about me. I knew they never voted for me. This guy, I have not a clue. And when I read something, sometimes I didn't like it, but he was honestly and accurately reporting. Maybe I did something stupid. I said something stupid. Well, that wasn't his fault. He simply reported what was. I couldn't blame him. Other times I do something that was notable and I'd get a nice, depiction of that. But that's objectivity. I would use the word, but not in the religious sense, but in a bigger sense. He was an agnostic when it came to his affinity or his lack thereof for me. And that to me was the mark of a great reporter. And I've often said, if you can be that guy that when you write about a public person and they read your stories and they have no idea what you think of them, you are a huge journalistic success.
And if you try to do that in much of the media newsrooms or places today, you'll have social media mobs jump all over you, especially from the left. It does happen from the right as well, but it really happens vehemently from the left to bring them back into line. Wait a minute, what are you doing? You're not towing the party line. And that, you said earlier, social media has played a big role in really destroying journalism as we once knew it.
Absolutely, it has. So, I hope Christians get involved. I hate it when Christians say, oh, I don't want to get involved in the media because they're so liberal. Why are they so liberal? Because none of the conservatives want to play the game? Maybe that's it. Then why abandon that whole endeavor to the people on the far left? Same with politics. Hey, politics is dirty. I always said this, everybody wants to eat from a clean plate, but somebody's got to do the dishes. So be a dishwasher. That's what if you're getting into politics as a Christian, roll up your sleeves and plan on having dirty dishwater up to your elbows. And there'll be people who will say, look at you, you're all dirty with that dishwater. And just remind them, well, you know what? I'll take my arms out of the dishwasher or out of the dishwater. But tonight, when you eat your meal, it'll be on a dirty plate. How you like that?
I tell you, that's a really good metaphor. I've heard a lot of them over the years about politics, but Mike, that is a really good one. Comes from a down home Arkansas boy, that's for sure. Well, Mike, I want to thank you for coming on the podcast and sharing your insights. You have been through it all. You've got the wisdom and discernment and just good word for our listeners today. And I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Guy, great to talk to you and my best to you. And I'm grateful as I look back over 31 years of friendship. God bless you, my friend.
Thank you. You too. As a certified professional leadership coach, I have the privilege of working with leaders of all ages and backgrounds. I'm passionately driven to help each of these men and women be better servants every day. In this podcast, I hope to help you do the same. That's my calling and my mission. If this message today speaks to you, please subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast app and let your friends and colleagues know about it. You could also visit our website. It's flourishing-leadership.com. That's flourishing-leadership.com. I want to thank you for joining us today. And most of all, I want to thank you for taking seriously what we're talking about and what we need today in our culture, which is flourishing leadership. We need your leadership to step up. Thank you for your efforts to do so, for being part of this podcast and sharing that with others.